this group of California Democrats, like those people are watching MSNBC like every night. They would vote for Tim Miller if they could, right?
Schiff needs to get some pearls. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Focus Group podcast. I'm Sarah Longwell, publisher of the Bulwark, and the race we're covering this week is a stimulus program for Democratic consultants, the California Senate race. I say this because this is a race between two candidates who have impeccable resistance credentials, and that means they're currently printing money from small dollar donors around the country. And California has a weird primary system where the top two candidates in the primary, regardless of party, will advance to the general election. The race has two main players. You've got Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, who has been tough on Trump from day one, from the Russia investigation to the first impeachment inquiry to the January 6th committee. Then you have Democratic Congresswoman Katie Porter, whose whiteboard is feared by CEOs everywhere. One of them is going to be a U.S. senator and may get a look for president in 2028. But rest assured, California also has a governor who's itching to run for president. So you're going to hear a lot about these characters in the years ahead. Now, cards on the table. I'm not especially enamored with either Schiff or Porter, or Gavin Newsom for that matter. But to break down these characters and how California politics will reverberate around the country, I am turning to one of my favorite California libs, Jon Favreau, co-host of Crooked Media's Pod Save America and host of Offline with Jon Favreau and fellow focus group aficionado. Jon, thanks so much for being here.
I love this show. I'm a focus groupie.
We'll send you a mug. You'll get a mug.
I listen to this every Saturday, so I'm excited. I can't believe I'm doing California though. California politics. I barely pay attention.
Oh no. I hope that's
kidding.
Not true, because I'm really counting on you to carry this show, man, because the amount of research I had to do to be like, what is happening in California?
I did research too.
Oh no. Oh no. Okay. So, like I said at the top, Katie Porter and Adam Schiff both have these outsized national brands, and that means they have so much money, flush with cash. And in fact, they have raised, do you know this in your research, that they have raised more money so far than any of the endangered Democratic incumbents, like Sherrod Brown in Ohio, John Tester in Montana, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, and Jackie Rosen in Nevada. It's a
pricey state. It's a pricey state to run for office in.
Do we think this is a wise use of small dollar donors right now?
I mean, yeah. No, I think it's not a wise. I think no. So let me try that again. No, I don't. I don't think it's a wise use of small dollar donations. And I should say that I know both Katie Porter and Adam Schiff personally and love them both. But no, I would not be that's not where I would be donating. And that's not where, I mean, we have Vote Save America here at Crooked Media. That's not where we tell people to donate their money either. We tell them to donate their money to one of these very competitive races in a swing state.
That's good. Okay, so I'm going to jump right into our focus group of California Democrats. Did you watch this whole thing?
Mm-hmm, I sure did.
Okay. Man, love these California Dems. So these are Democrats. They want to vote in the primary. And Adam Schiff right now is sitting in the mid to high 20s, and Katie Porter and Republican former Dodgers first baseman Steve Garvey are duking it out for second place right now. I got to tell you, this is like the Venn diagram of all the things I know so little about. It's like former baseball players and California Democratic politics. I am so lost right now. I was like, somebody explain to me who this Republican is. And
no one knows here. No one knows in this. Because if you knew Steve Garvey, you're already it's from a different era of politics. Like I vaguely remember the name because he was around in baseball, but no, he's not well known here in the state.
So it's funny, we barely talk about him. We're going to barely talk about him in the show, but I guess I am curious. It sounded like people have been trying to get this guy to run forever. Like Republicans really think he has a shot. Are they smoking something, or what's the deal?
Definitely Republicans in the, California is a one-party state era, and we're just dying for notable Republicans that may have name recognition in the state because there are so few who also aren't crazy. So I think that's why there's been that push for so
long. Okay. Well, are you surprised he's pulling even with Katie Porter?
I'm not surprised. I was talking to some California political folks on the Dem side. And it's just like voter registration numbers, right? Like any Republican running is going to pull, especially in a field where Schiff and Porter and Barbara Lee are splitting up the Dem vote, that any Republican, no matter how crazy or how normal, is going to end up around where Garvey's polling right now, which is like, what, 22%, 25%?
That's depressing that a more normal Republican just can't get anywhere. Because then they're just going to keep running Larry Elder weirdos.
Well, but this is the problem with, and this happens in red states too, but in really blue states, the Republican Party has become, in the Trump era, even more extreme. And so the candidates that Republicans run have become more extreme. Like, I'm from Massachusetts, but like the Massachusetts Republican Party, which once gave us like Mitt Romney as governor, is now just like filled with election denial, election denying lunatics.
The Republican Party, you say, has gotten more extreme.
And especially in the states where it's not competitive. So it's like
yes. No, you are 100% right about that. Well, so it was interesting in this group. It was very clear why Adam Schiff is currently the front runner in this race, listening to these voters. Let's listen.
I like that he at least appears to have the persona of courage when you're against, obviously, the Republican Party, and we know how their persona comes off. We can't keep having wallflowers. Seeing him in action on his panels gives me confidence that even under, the immense spotlight, he's able to continue to hold his own, hoping that, of course, he's done his due diligence, because we all know we're being looked at under the biggest microscope for any flaws, any misses.
I think he's got a stern face, and he can stand with his back against the wall if need be. That's who I want in my corner. Somebody who's not afraid, but they're not a bully either. And they're about the work, right? They're about getting it done, like he did with the trials. He's just about the work, getting it done. So yeah, I would definitely lean more towards Adam Schiff.
I would be equally pleased with either candidate at this point. I think I'm leaning slightly towards Schiff just because of, his record in Congress, but I'd be perfectly happy with Katie Porter as candidate too.
I am leaning more towards Adam Schiff. I do like his presence. I do like that a lot of his ads haven't been attacking other people for their personal traits.
I feel like he maybe was a little too confident in the way he talked about Trump sometimes, in terms of having the goods and, being sure that he would be convicted and that sort of thing. But, it was maybe a little bit of hubris that came back to bite the Dems in the butt. But I mean, I think he's done generally a good job. And from what I heard, that Schiff has been kind of, I don't know if this is true, but like more kind of pushing Garvey so that he's his opponent in the election rather than Katie Porter. I feel like that's playing with fire when I hear that kind of strategy happen.
So this was interesting to me when I heard this, so I was running it down with my producer was helping me run this down. the idea of Schiff boosting Garvey, but then it sounds like Katie Porter, there's also a Republican she's boosting early or Early. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. Early. And they're both doing this thing that has become a little bit of a tactic, it seems like, among Democrats lately, of boosting Republicans in order. But what do you make of this? Like, is that what's happening right now?
Well, it's a little different than the sort of national Democratic tactic of like boosting Trumpy MAGA candidates so that you get them into general and they're easier to beat. It's because of this top two primary system. And so Schiff doesn't want to face Katie Porter in a general election, because I actually think if it's Schiff and Porter in the general, he's got not just because she's another Democrat, but I actually think she could win that race, just because of the way that California Democratic Party is and Democratic voters. And so, so he's trying, and I guess Newsom did this in 2018 as well. He sort of like started running ads about the Republican to try to knock out Villaraigosa, so that it wasn't Newsom and Villaraigosa in the final two. Antonio Villaraigosa was the mayor of LA and running against Newsom, and Newsom did that with some success. So I think it's like a tried and true tactic here in California. What I found interesting about the groups is that these are clearly Democrats who are engaged enough that they knew this was a strategy. And so they've not only seen the ads, but they've seen or heard the commentary about how this is a tactic. And some of them clearly seem to not like it.
I got to tell you, this group was super engaged.
Engaged.
I was like, and you know, for me, I was coming to this race like a little cold. I was like, they know so much that I don't know. They're like, this is usually I'm sort of like, you know, I feel like I've got the edge a little bit on a lot of these as a close watcher of politics and voters not paying a ton of attention. But they, and it wasn't even like they were so inundated with ads. They were following it. They knew a lot about these politicians. You know, were you surprised at how, with the exception of the guy who was kind of like, he was mad that I guess Schiff had never gotten Trump, never got the cuffs on him. But other than that, he, you know, they liked Schiff a lot. He has a stern face. There was one woman who talked a lot about people's like how their faces and how they looked. You know, Newsom. Let's just face it, he's very handsome, very handsome. But so were you surprised that they liked Schiff so much?
A little bit, but it sort of answered some questions I had about this race because I had wondered why Porter has had trouble like catching Schiff. Mm-hmm. And the more I thought about it, like you said that they both have impeccable resistance credentials, but Adam Schiff is like the physical manifestation of the anti-Trump resistance. And he's like an MSNBC darling, right? Like the wine moms all love Adam Schiff. This group of California Democrats, like those people are watching MSNBC like every night. They would vote for Tim Miller if they could, right? Like, so they know. And I think that
Schiff needs to get some pearls.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But Schiff's strategy of just being on TV constantly over the last several years in the Trump era, like not only the impeachment stuff, but he's out there all the time. It's clearly paid off. I also think he just has so much more money. So I think it's like the money, his relationships with other Democratic politicians in the state that go like they're very deep. Nancy Pelosi loves Adam Schiff. So the whole Pelosi machine, everyone like that, they're behind him. So he's got higher name ID. And I also think that the issue environment, at least in terms of what the media is covering, favors Schiff more than Porter because we're in the Trump era still. And so he's seen as anti-Trump. And so that helps him. And I also think that since Gaza has been in the news, Gaza has sort of helped Barbara Lee with some progressives who like really care about that. Neither of those issue environments help Katie Porter as much because her thing is I can take it to CEOs. I'm an economic populist. I can I can have the whiteboard and the hearings, and I think that's if you did polls of voters and focus groups, I think they would really care about that stuff. But I think in terms of what the media is covering and what breaks through, it's all, especially out here for California Democrats, it's all like anti-Trump stuff. And I think he's more associated with that.
You know, that makes sense because I would say that if you would ask me for my gut impressions of this race, I would first admit how little I know about it. But then I would say I would sort of go with Katie Porter. I'm like, it makes sense the Barbara Lee siphoning off some of the more progressive voters from Katie. But I guess I was just sort of like an older white man seems not their time, you know, time's up, old white men. But actually your point. And I also think of Katie Porter as an MSNBC darling. Like I know who she is and I picture her with a whiteboard in her hand. You know, those clips also went viral, but not that I don't, you know, watch MSNBC from time to time, but I wouldn't say I'm sitting there watching the cable news so much. So I guess I didn't realize maybe how ubiquitous his presence is.
No, he's more from the Chuck Schumer school of, get out in front of a camera every possible second you can. One more thing on Porter. I did a focus group for the Wilderness last year of young voters in Irvine, which is her district, her House district that she had represented since 2018 now. And all these voters were like, they're young people, they're in her district, they had voted before in a general election, and they were like the perfect fit for Katie Porter. They were like railing against corporations. It was right after Dobbs. They wanted to talk about reproductive freedom, on and on. And then I was like, so do you know who your representative is? And will you be voting in the midterms? And not one person knew Katie Porter, and it was her district.
Oh my God.
So I do think that
Yeah.
like, as much as I think she's a, like a rising star in the Democratic Party, it's just she hasn't been around long enough as Schiff, and she just doesn't have the national exposure he does.
This is just because you're another focus group, right? But I had something very similar happen in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, where we were doing her district, and somebody was, God, now I'm going to blank on her name. The Senate candidate who was also a blonde woman from 2 cycles ago in Georgia, Kelly Loeffler. Thank you. They're like the person's like, yeah, she's a little crazy, but she owned the basketball team, and it was there's definitely, it is funny how these people with their national brands, the district vaguely knows their national brand, but like may not realize they actually are their representative. It's so true.
Exactly.
Okay, so like we were saying, Katie Porter, she's trailing Steve Garvey for the second place spot in the general election in most polls, but she's like within striking distance. She's close. So I want to listen to the case she's making against the strategy that Schiff's employing of trying to elevate Garvey.
If it's a Schiff-Garvey matchup, the race is basically over on March 5th. And I think that is really bad for California, and it's really bad for little d democracy. We do best when we have competitive elections. And it's really disappointing that Representative Schiff is spending millions and millions of dollars trying to end this election before November. The TV ads we've seen, the only communications from Steve Garvey to voters are coming from Democrat Adam Schiff. And so I think that should show voters what they need to know about what the strategy really is here. It's about taking the best qualified woman who's competitive in the race, who can win in November, off the ballot. And I don't think that's what someone who's a self-styled defender of democracy like Representative Schiff should be doing at this point.
Ooh, hitting him on democracy.
I know.
He is anti-democracy.
Right for the jugular.
She's going at him hard here. And it sounds like it's breaking through a little bit. I mean, one of the voters brought it up and said he didn't like it. Can this work against him?
I can't tell if it's too much of a bank shot. When I heard that clip, my first thought was, if I was hitting him on that, which I would be if I were her. And by the way, if I was him, like I'd probably be employing the strategy he is as well, right? And then if I was her, I would hit him on it. But I would say, like, we should have 2 Democrats. It's California. We should have 2 Democrats. We shouldn't even risk the idea that there could be a Republican. And why wouldn't Adam Schiff want to have 2 Democrats also, right? Like, making it democracy is just sort of a little esoteric with voters.
Yeah, sure is.
The real reason that I think her argument is compelling, and she didn't mention this probably because she can't, but there's so many competitive House races in California, and where Republicans could win, and Democrats could flip the House just here in California alone. And if there's just 2 if there's a Democrat and a Republican in the fall, you might get a bunch of Republicans going out to vote because they think that they can vote for the Republican might win. But if there's 2 Democrats, you might actually have lower turnout among Republicans in some of these House races, and it might help those House Democrats win those races. Now, that's way too complicated a case to make from Katie Porter publicly, but that would be the argument for Democrats for having 2 Democrats as opposed to having Garvey and Schiff.
I don't know. You just made that very succinctly, and that is incredibly persuasive. I find that incredibly persuasive, but maybe it. But even just the point about, like, it should be 2 Democrats. This is our state. Seems like a good shot for her to take. Yeah, I mean, as 2 people who do focus groups, it means that we know that democracy is just not the thing that voters are getting lit up about. Although sometimes you hear it from Democrats, but man, do I not hear it from.
And this is the group that I would have thought you would hear it most from.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't ask them specifically, but it's interesting how it just doesn't come up.
Yeah.
It never comes up. I'm really afraid for democracy. All right, so I want to get to how these focus groups talk about Porter, because, people like her, but she's clearly playing second fiddle to Schiff in the group. Let's listen.
Katie Porter was my representative, and I, really thought she was great. So she would be my first choice. But I also, am kind of sad that she's not going to be a representative anymore, because then leaves a vacancy.
I've heard nothing about Katie Porter on media broadcasts in the Santa Cruz area. I read 2 newspapers every day, the San Jose Mercury News and the Santa Cruz Sentinel. And they've mentioned almost nothing about Katie Porter.
And I also like Adam Schiff because he's not afraid to take things on, and he's in the forefront. He's outspoken, and it's kind of a shame that we can't have both.
I do like that Katie Porter's gone after like big pharma. She's kind of for the consumers. So I'll kind of just have to see how it goes from here to see which one ultimately that I would pick.
I love Katie Porter because I love the way she would take on Steve Mnuchin, and seeing footage of her, and she's quirky, she's brilliant, she's a lawyer, but she likes tricking people into thinking she's stupid, and then she comes out and just rips them into shreds, and I just love watching her.
Like, I don't know enough about Katie Porter. All I know is this: she's the queen of the whiteboard, right? Isn't that the ads? Every time I see the ad, it's like there's a whiteboard. She's something about her and whiteboards. I'm like, that's not enough for me. This is not LA City Council. This is like something big, right? So I don't know enough about her.
I'm surprised how many people say I don't know enough about her, because I will tell you, when I do Democratic groups that are just across the country and I ask them, all right, well, who would you like to see run for president? She's always in the mix. Like, some progressive always brings up Katie Porter. And so to me, I was just surprising. And I know, I guess she doesn't have as much money as Schiff, but like, she's still got quite a bit of money. So why isn't her stuff breaking through?
It's a great question. The Northern California voters, I think that it makes sense that they wouldn't hear about her as much. Just hearing them talk about like what's breaking through, it also makes me think like we're having some real newspaper media issues out here in California. Like LA Times just laid off like a ton of reporters.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the biggest state in the country, but we don't have like a ton of coverage of politics here because we're having like shrinking local news issues. And I really think that's affecting what voters are paying attention to. I also think that so much of what voters are consuming here is the national news and not necessarily local California news. And I just think she hasn't been around long enough to really break through. Like, you heard the people who were that were her constituents in the focus group or from Southern California, they're much more familiar with her. But I just think she hasn't been. It's interesting is that aside from the like, I see her at the whiteboard and it's not city council, there weren't a lot of negative comments about her. It was more just like, oh, I don't know as much about her, and I know Adam Schiff. Like that, it could just come down to that, which is tough for her. But it's just a matter of not breaking through.
Can I get a prediction out of you? Like, is she gonna overtake Garvey? Like, what do you think?
I think it's gonna be tough. I mean, often the Republicans who poll in California end up like the polls overestimate their support.
Mm-hmm.
So it is possible that some of these polls are overestimating Republican support, and then at the end of the day, she pulls it out. But I think it's going to be extremely close. And I mean, I can't imagine a ton of Republicans coming out for a March 5th primary in California. So that makes me think that maybe she could do it. I might bet that she pulls it out, but it would be like, I'm like 55-45 on it.
Yeah, you're not going all in. You're not betting it all on black. Tell me about California politics a little bit broad, because when you just said like everything I know about California politics like seems to be the recalls. That's been the big story out of California. But what is I should have asked you this at the top, but I don't know that I spent a lot of time thinking, has California politics changed a lot in the last 10 years? Like, what do you feel like the tenor and tone of politics is there now?
I mean, I've 10 years is how long I've been here. I moved here in 2014. And my impression of it as someone who lived on the East Coast is I've lived in DC and Massachusetts and Chicago. And I have never lived in a place where the Democratic field of politicians is always so crowded and competitive, and they've all been around forever. And there's like 10 Democrats running to replace Adam Schiff in his seat. There's a bunch running for Katie Porter's seat. It reminds me of like people who know New York politics well. It reminds me of like New York Democratic politics, where it's just because it's the only game in town, it's just a bunch of Democrats. Like, I think relationships are more important. Like, how long you've been around is more important. I think it's more difficult for an outsider like Katie Porter to break through in a big way than people who've just sort of like come up through the system and were mayor and then spent their time in the assembly and then went to Congress, right? Like, those are the people. It's a very like, okay, now it's your turn kind of state in the Democratic Party. And I mean, that's from, we see that with Pelosi, but it's like throughout the whole state.
You guys need to ship like 100,000 of those folks over to Montana or something.
I know.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that persists, though, is because it's such a big state and it costs so much money, right?
Yeah.
And so there's such a high bar to entry. Like there is there's a guy who's running for Schiff's seat, and he was on the school board race here in LA. And I had like met him a couple of years ago at a fundraiser, and they were like, oh yeah, like how, he's like, oh, I'm raising money for the race. I'm like, how much is the race? He's like, oh, it's more than, it's going to cost more than most Senate races. This year. I mean, there's a school board race in LA. I mean, it's just like, it's the amount of money is insane.
And it's because there's so much money out there, right? And so everybody can raise so much. It's wild. Okay. So there's one more member of Congress in this race who's not expected to advance to the general election. We talked about her before, Congresswoman Barbara Lee. She staked out the left flank in this race, including, like you said, supporting the ceasefire in Gaza and a $50 minimum wage. She does not have any businesses in her corner, I suspect. But let's listen to how the group thought about her.
I don't even know if Lee is actually relevant, but I probably should do my due diligence and do a little bit more research on her as well.
I worked at a hospital in Oakland for a few years, and I met Barbara Lee a couple of times. Right now, I'm leaning towards Adam Schiff. I would really like to be able to support Barbara Lee, but the last picture that I saw of her, she's getting up there with Biden and Trump. She's in her mid to late 70s now, and I think she would have trouble, I think, getting elected because she's from Oakland. And there's a lot of prejudice against Oakland. It has a reputation of being a very poor minority city, a minority occupied city with a lot of violence. I hate to say it, but the prejudice against people of color is basically exposed in cities like Oakland. Oakland doesn't get nearly the support that it needs for public health, for public safety. The Warriors left, the Raiders have left, the A's are leaving. What can I say? I don't think that she would have a very easy campaign because of all these negatives about Oakland.
And I really like Barbara Lee too, but I think she might be a little too mild for the aggression of the Republicans. And so that's why I think Adam Schiff and Katie Porter I just love them both.
Tim Miller, our friend, also left Oakland. So along with all the sports teams, I guess. I don't know which came first. It's funny, or not funny, but the guy was talking a lot about she is black, which is why he was talking about that, Barbara Lee. But it seemed to me the age thing was the thing that was jumping out. And because, I mean, you've got Feinstein, obviously you've got Biden, like age is top of mind for people. But what would she ever drop out and endorse Katie Porter? It occurs to me, even as I'm thinking about this, the only thing I know about Barbara Lee is that she was like the only vote against Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's how she became like super well known nationally. I mean, she's a legend in Oakland, but like nationally, it was her vote against Afghanistan that really sort of put her on the map.
And so what is her profile there in the state? What do people, because everybody was like very polite and nice about her. I like her, but there was no takers on voting for her.
Well, we were just talking about how Katie Porter hasn't really broken through. I think that Barbara Lee is like very well known in Oakland, but outside of Oakland, not even like Northern California, she just is not well known. And I think that like super political nerds who like us, who, I remember her vote against Afghanistan, stuff like that. Like we know her, but I think that, and I saw this in early polls of this race, just her name ID was just so low.
It's low.
For someone who's been in Congress as long as she has. So I think if you have low name ID and like the guy said, she's older, she's the oldest candidate, and she's so far left. I mean, I'm a good lib, but $50 minimum wage, I didn't even know that was a thing. I read about that a couple weeks ago, and I was like, she's proposing a what?
It's the real vanguard. Vanguard.
The real vanguard.
Wage. Yeah.
But I don't think she'd drop out. I interviewed her a couple months ago. She came down here, and she was like, there should be a Black woman in the Senate. There should be a Black woman running for this Senate seat, and I'm the person to do that. Like, she just feels very passionately about the fact that there should be representation in the Senate. There should be a Black woman in the Senate, because obviously Kamala Harris was in the Senate and then went to become VP. So I don't get the sense that she would drop. And also now it's just, I think look, if Schiff and Porter advance to the runoff, I could see her backing Porter for sure. Mm-hmm. Maybe, although I don't know. She's like a sort of, she's been in Congress for a while, so I'm sure she has a good relationship with Schiff too.
Interesting. Okay. Well, now that we've done half an hour on the internecine California politics, we're gonna, and I don't even know how I feel about this. I want to talk about one of the early front runners for the 2028 Democratic nomination. And you are definitely going to be happier that he is a front runner than I am. The slickest governor in all 50 states, Gavin Newsom. I want to, this is so painful for me, but I want you to listen to how this group talked about Newsom because they love him.
I know.
I like the way he knows how to work the other side. He has that movie star way about him, and it lets other people put their guard down. And he actually got along with Trump, and because of that, we were able to get a lot of benefits. He didn't make enemies with Trump, which I think is good.
And I believe that he's doing the job to the best of his ability, period. They were trying to take him out of office. Right, the recall, thank you. And he beat that, so he came back with even more fire, like immediately after, and he just kept working. He just skipped right over it. He didn't have a grudge. He just kept it pushing. So I appreciate that.
Talking about the debate with DeSantis, one of the things that he's not afraid to do is to go places where normally someone of his political mind would be uncomfortable, and to confront the things that people are throwing at him to intend to make him uncomfortable. Taking on the immigration crisis at the border in Texas and in California, and dealing with the issue of abortion, the issue of states refusing money for child food programs, things like this. He's just not afraid to state his case to anyone who's willing to listen, and even those who aren't willing to listen.
I think he's sincere. I know. I think that ultimately he cares. First of all, he's good looking. So that's sorry. I just have to say it. He's a good looking man. And he just seems like he seems humble. And I think that that's what attracts me to him by way of, I trust him, and ultimately that's it. He's very trustworthy. Of course, things happen, the whole Chinese laundry restaurant thing, he was out of pocket, of course, you know what I mean? And he explained it a little bit, but the fact that he was in a position to have to explain himself is not a good thing.
Okay. So the French laundry, not the Chinese laundry. But I love that. But here's the thing. I could not believe. I have so many grudges I hold against Gavin Newsom personally. He doesn't care. He and I haven't talked about it, but I have these things. And the French laundry thing was terrible. And none of them, let me tell you what, I spent so much time talking to Michigan voters because I spent a lot more time in the swing states. And the anger, even though she won by 10 points, the things that people held on to in Michigan around Gretchen Whitmer going to visit her father during COVID when the state was on lockdown, like people held on hard to that stuff. Now they hated Tudor Dixon, but like she was kind of like, yeah, he did that thing and that got some bad things, but whatever. He's great. He's handsome. I love him. Why do Democrats? I want to have a long conversation about Gavin Newsom.
Me too. I'm ready. I have so many thoughts about Gavin Newsom.
All right. So why don't you just hit me up top with like, why do they love him so much? Why don't they think he's an oozy, because in a Republican group, he would be read as a regular politician, which Republican voters hate. But no, they love him. So tell me why.
So first of all, I think a lot of Democrats probably who aren't familiar with him would view him like that, like sort of too slick.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell my personal Gavin Newsom experiences. So when my wife and I moved here in 2014, it was like a couple months in to living here. We were invited to some fundraiser in the neighborhood, and Newsom was there. He's lieutenant governor at the time, and I was like rolling my eyes ahead of time. I'm like, this guy is like so slick. I don't know why people are talking about him, And I've like heard the backstory, and I was like, I don't know. We sit in this fundraiser, and he goes on and on for a while, and he's so smart. He is such a policy geek. And we left the fundraiser, and I turned to Emily, and I was like, that is the smartest, dumb-looking guy I have ever encountered in politics. And like his looks are actually doing him a disservice because they are masking how smart he is, right? So then there's that, and then I've gotten to meet him and interview him, and sort of like off camera, he's also very funny. He's sort of in on the game. He gets it. He like wants to gossip about politics. He's a political animal as well as a policy nerd, and he's also very like self-aware, and he's charming in a way that I did not expect. And I was very suspicious when I first encountered him. I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. And now I get it. I also think that he could win an open primary in the Democratic Party for president. Like, I think he is a very, very strong candidate in the primary because he has everything that the sort of resistance era Democratic Party wants, right? And what do they want? They want you hear it in the focus groups. They want a fighter. They think that Democrats are always getting beaten by Republicans because we're too nice. And Michelle Obama said when they go low, we go high, and that was bad. And you hear all these like tough fighting Democrats always complain about that, but not Gavin Newsom. He's gonna go stick it right to the Republicans, and like that is a big part of the party wants that. Now, if he was the Democratic nominee, I have the same concerns I'm sure you do.
Because you know what swing voters from Pennsylvania want? They want the governor of California. Like, do you know the campaigns? Republicans would destroy this guy for his electric car loving. I think he would get destroyed. But I wanted to. That's actually not even my biggest beef with him. Mm-hmm. My biggest beef is actually sort of doesn't even have to do with him exactly. It's that the Democratic Party, and I understand I'm coming at this from like a very sad, disaffected Republican place. It's given birth to all of these stars over the last sort of 3 cycles, right? And so many of them are now quite appealing to me, right? You got Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer and Raphael Warnock and, Abigail Spanberger and Alyssa Slotkin and Gina Raimondo and Pete Buttigieg. I mean, there's just a lot of good, pragmatic politicians who are from swing states. Gretchen Whitmer won by 10 points in Michigan. Like, please send in her, Josh Shapiro won by 14 points in Pennsylvania. No Democrat in California, the steel sharpens steel. But when you live in California and you're just running against other Dems, and he's, the only time he's really had to run against a Republican is when they're doing the recall races and somebody's running against him. And those are not serious Republicans. And so just to hand it over after all the work that got done to sort of, to me, kind of get the Democratic Party to a place where it did have a lot of pragmatic stars that could really win in these swing states, and then hand it over to Gavin Newsom, who, by the way, used to be married to Kimberly Guilfoyle. This is also one of the things I really love against him. There is a picture of him, and it will be the only picture that anyone shows of Gavin Newsom. I don't care how handsome he is now. He is lying on a bearskin rug in like a post-coital spooning situation with Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Look, he's crossing the aisle. He's making friends with Republicans. That's
the
what you
best
want.
was not yet to come, Gavin Newsom. The best was that is. I think that's my concern, because you are right though. When I ask people who they like nationally, I give Gavin Newsom credit for this. I was just in San Francisco and I said to people, look, I don't like Gavin Newsom. I said to this crowd of people at a live show, I don't like him. And everyone booed me. And then I was like, but the one thing I'll say is, in the total absence of surrogates right now for Joe Biden is my biggest frustration. And Gavin Newsom is the one guy out there throwing punches and seems to be sort of cheerfully going to bat for Biden. Now, obviously, it's because he wants his job, but like, he is doing the work and he's doing it with the policy chops. Like, he goes out there and he can talk about what Biden's done on oil and gas, and and this or that. So
it's effective. I mean, he's the most effective surrogate, and what you'd expect from a liberal California governor who goes out and is a surrogate and goes on Fox News is not actually what you get from Gavin Newsom, which is, I think, also why people like him so much, because they're like, oh, this guy's supposed to be a liberal governor of California, but he's kicking ass on with Sean Hannity. And look, there are plenty of Democrats who are like, we shouldn't go on Fox, we shouldn't do all these things. And I'm like, I am. Well, I think because you and I like the voters, we talk to the voters, and I'm just like, I think it's the best way to reach people. We have to reach those audiences, and so I think his media strategy is excellent. Like, I'm so impressed with him. I like a lot of things, but the real challenge for the Democratic Party, back to your point about like, we've built this bench of stars, is like, the brand you have to build to be acceptable to swing voters broadly is antithetical to the brand that gets attention in politics today. And so if you're Josh Shapiro, like, how do you get attention? How does Josh Shapiro get known? Well, by being just like a common sense, soft-spoken governor from Pennsylvania who's done really well. Like, he's not going to get that much attention. And when he goes and gives a speech, like, I think he's a good orator, but he's not like the most charismatic politician, right? Even though I think I'd feel really good about him as a nominee. And so I think that there's this tension where the media stars who break through are creating brands that are not necessarily going to attract swing voters, and then all of these people who are going to attract swing voters are not quite as exciting for a Democratic base that really wants someone to go out there and fight.
So on this point about being a fighter, when Newsom challenged DeSantis to the debate, or they challenged each other, I don't know who did the challenging, I don't know who threw down the gauntlet, but like, taking an opportunity like that was like a smart 2028 play. But I will tell you, I watched Gavin Newsom in that debate, and I remember the reactions from that debate. It was like a Rorschach test for your like previously held positions, because the Democrats thought Gavin crushed it and the Republicans thought DeSantis crushed it. I thought, boy, I don't like either of these guys very much, and I think they're both overrated. But did you think he had a good debate that night? Like, were you like, ooh, I'm impressed at how he handled DeSantis?
I'm an interesting case because I watched the first 30 minutes and then I had to go somewhere. And after the first 30 minutes, I was like, yeah, I think Gavin's doing really well. And I think he's owning this debate. And then as I was like on the way to wherever I was going, I was getting texts from friends and they were like, oh, now it's just a mess. And now they're both just yelling at each other. And it's like, no one's got control and it's just bad for everyone. So I don't think I saw the part of the debate that kind of devolved. But from what I saw at the beginning, I thought he got the better of DeSantis, but I also think DeSantis is just terrible from a performance perspective, like one of the worst candidates I've ever seen. So I don't think it was a heavy lift to outperform DeSantis, but I think he did, at least at the beginning.
I just think that the Gavin Newsom, Tucker Carlson 2028 election cycle is going to be really brutal for me. That's how I feel about it. But I think that I want to emphasize this point though about the being a fighter, and I don't know how to square this circle because, but I want to ask you about why. So your point about Josh Shapiro, right now, my biggest frustration with the Biden administration or Biden's sort of campaign is that they don't have this big bench of surrogates out there. Like, they should be flooding the zone with these assets. They should be all over TV. They should be out there with Biden. I'm not sure what is going on. Like, I can't tell if it's them, like they don't want to get his 38% approval rating stink all over them, or if it's Biden's not reaching out and asking them to. I mean, I saw Whitmer this weekend. She came out and she talked about Michigan and said, you know, she was very good. She was saying, you know, a vote not for Biden is a vote for Trump. And let's just remember that. And I understand the pain of everybody in my community. She was great. And I thought, why aren't you out there all the time slugging away for him? And like, why? So Gavin Newsom's ambition, like he sees it as a benefit to himself to go do that. Do these other folks not see it as a benefit to go out there and be advocating on behalf of Biden and raising their profiles? Because they do have to do some of that. You're totally right.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I suspect a few things are at play. One, maybe they think it's still early and that by the time we get to the spring and summer, they're going to be all over the place. I hope, because I agree with you. I do think we need a lot more surrogates out there. And then I think it's a question of like, when you do these interviews, do you say something? Do you really break through? And like, what are the good? Like, I think that we're running out of good opportunities for some of these surrogates to go on and really drive the message, unless you're like Newsom and you're going to go on Fox, right? Like, I don't know that someone going on and sitting down with, you know, Margaret Brennan on a Sunday morning, which is what a lot of them do, or Kristen Welker, or you know, like is really going to break through in a big way, or is like the best way to have Biden surrogates out there. But and so then you're like, well, what are the ways to break through and reach audiences that aren't necessarily consuming all the political news that we all consume? And I don't know that, I don't even know if they have the, I don't know if like their staff or the Biden campaign staff like knows what to do with them all or where to put them.
Yeah. It's almost like you're saying though that good serious governance is at direct odds with being able to build the kind of national brand, like break through and build the kind of brand you need in order to find a constituency and win elections. I mean,
it was rare that Obama was able to do this in 2008, right? Which is like, he was inspiring and exciting to people, but he also, especially looking back now, sort of had the political instincts to know that he was supposed to be broadly appealing to the general electorate, probably because he was a black guy with the name Barack Hussein Obama, and so that was weighing on his mind.
Right.
But I think that now sometimes you get a lot of politicians like doing an Obama impression, which it doesn't work as well today because politics has certainly advanced since then. So you kind of get I think there is a good bench, and I think that it's my hope that some of these folks, because they have good governing instincts and because they know what to do to maintain their brand with swing voters, will find a way to be more inspiring, get more attention, a little more exciting. Like, I think that stuff you can always dial up and figure out how to do. I think it's harder if you're a Gavin Newsom to be like, well, I'm going to change my brand so that I'm more appealing to swing voters.
Jon Favreau, thank you so much for being on the Focus Group podcast. It was so good to talk to you. I love talking to somebody else who does focus groups, and I listen to all your stuff as well. And I should have plugged.
I'm the biggest Bulwark fan.
I should have plugged the Wilderness. Why didn't I plug the Wilderness? We should do more.
Yeah, Wilderness is gonna. Listen to old seasons of the Wilderness. The new one's gonna be out in May, so we're gonna be, and hopefully you'll be back on as well.
I think I'm on it. I think I've like already recorded it. But you're the best. I love your stuff. I love all this crossover things. All these crossover things we're doing. Who knew we'd find ourselves here?
Who knew? All
right.
Let me tell you, our Liz Cheney episode. Our Liz Cheney episode got more downloads than most of our episodes.
I think that's because it's the Bulwark effect, right? Where our people are also coming over there.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, man. Thank you. And thanks to all the rest of you for listening to another episode of the Focus Group podcast. We will see you next week.